The teacher yanked Elijah's essay from his hands, eyes narrowing. "There's no way you wrote this." The classroom froze, whispers rising like smoke, as she accused him of cheating in front of everyone. He stood silent, humiliated, the only black kid in the room. But then she pulled out another paper, one he'd never seen, with his name forged at the bottom. And that's when the principal walked in, holding a police officer's badge. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. 12-year-old Elijah Simmons understood silence long before he understood wealth. Silence was the way people stopped talking when his mother entered a room wearing a cleaning uniform. Silence was the pause that followed when teachers read his last name and searched his face for confirmation. Silence was survival. So when his mother, Mia Simmons, stood frozen in their small apartment, holding a cream-colored envelope embossed with gold lettering, Elijah already sensed that whatever was inside did not belong to them. The invitation had arrived by mistake. Mia knew that immediately. Her name was spelled wrong, her job title missing entirely. Annual Lockridge Christmas Gala, it read, followed by language meant for donors, executives, and legacy families. Mia worked nights cleaning one of the Lockridge corporate buildings downtown. Somehow her employee ID had been confused with an administrative contact, and the system had auto-generated an invitation. She should have thrown it away. She almost did. But Elijah had seen the envelope before she could hide it. His eyes had widened, not with greed, but with curiosity. He had never been invited anywhere that didn't require him to sit in the back, wait quietly, or be grateful just to be present. Mia hesitated, weighing the humiliation she'd endured her whole life against the look on her son's face, against the way he asked, carefully, "Is it fancy?" She told herself it was just a party. One night. No harm in letting him see something bigger than the world that kept shrinking around them. On the evening of the gala, Elijah wore a blazer that once belonged to a neighbor's son. The sleeves were a fraction too short, the shoulders slightly stiff, but Mia pressed it carefully, smoothing imaginary wrinkles as if doing so could iron out the distance between her son and the people they were about to face. She wore a simple black dress she'd owned for years, the kind that blended into walls, the kind she wore when she didn't want to be noticed. The Lockridge estate sat on a hill like it was watching the town below. Gates taller than Elijah's school fence opened slowly, deliberately, as if assessing whether they were worthy of entry. As they drove up the winding path, Elijah pressed his forehead against the window, counting the lights strung along the trees, the stone statues dusted with artificial snow, the sheer size of the place swallowing his breath whole. Inside, warmth hit them first. Then sound. Laughter that echoed too freely. Music played by a live string quartet, notes floating above polished marble floors. Everything smelled expensive. Pine, citrus, something faintly sweet and unfamiliar. Elijah took one careful step inside, and felt like he'd crossed an invisible line. Heads turned, not all at once, but enough. The kind of glances that landed quickly and stayed just long enough to calculate. Conversations dipped, then resumed at a slightly lower volume. Mia felt it immediately, the shift she'd learned to recognize without seeing. She placed a hand on Elijah's shoulder, guiding him forward, reminding him silently to stay close. They didn't belong there, and everyone knew it. Elijah noticed details others took for granted, the way servers moved swiftly, but avoided eye contact, the way kids his age clustered together in designer sweaters, their laughter loud and careless, before going quiet when he passed. One boy stared openly, then leaned toward his friends and whispered something that made them snicker. Elijah kept his eyes forward, the way his mother had taught him. A massive Christmas tree stood in the center of the ballroom, its ornaments reflecting distorted versions of the guests. Elijah saw himself in one of them, smaller, darker, bent at an odd angle. He wondered if that was how they saw him too. Mia approached the registration table, offering the invitation with a polite smile that had been practiced over years of necessity. The woman behind the table frowned, scanning the list. Her eyes flicked to Elijah, then back to the page, then to Mia again. "Oh," she said softly, but not kindly. "You're early." Mia nodded. She didn't correct her. She never did. They were given no name tags, no directions, just a vague gesture toward the room. Elijah followed his mother deeper into the crowd, every step feeling heavier than the last. He spotted tables overflowing with food, pastries dusted with sugar, chocolate fountains, trays of cookies shaped like snowmen and stars. His stomach tightened, not with hunger, but with the fear of wanting something he wasn't supposed to touch. They stopped near a wall, out of the way. That was where Mia always stood at events like this. Even when she wasn't working. Elijah stayed beside her, hands clasped, eyes scanning the room. He tried to imagine what it would feel like to belong there, to laugh too loudly, to reach for things without asking permission. After several minutes, Mia leaned down and whispered that she was going to find the restroom. "Don't move," she said gently. Elijah nodded. Alone, he felt smaller. He drifted a few steps toward the dessert table, drawn by the colors, the warmth, the simple normalcy of it. He watched other kids grab cookies without hesitation, crumbs falling onto the pristine floor. No one corrected them. No one stared. Elijah reached out slowly, his fingers hovering over a gingerbread man with a red icing smile. He hesitated, glancing around. No one was looking directly at him now. He picked it up, wrapping it carefully in a napkin, the way he'd seen his mother do at church events. It was such a small thing. A cookie. But it felt like crossing another line. That was when the room shifted again. Conversations didn't stop this time. They sharpened. A ripple moved through the crowd. Subtle but unmistakable, like a current changing direction. Elijah felt it before he saw it. He turned his head. Across the ballroom stood Preston Lockridge. He was taller than most men in the room, his presence amplified by tailored confidence and inherited power. Silver hair combed back perfectly. A red velvet jacket that seemed chosen specifically to command attention. He laughed at something a guest said, then his eyes drifted, landing on Elijah with precision. The smile faded. Preston's gaze lingered, narrowing not with confusion, but with recognition of something out of place. His eyes dropped to the blazer, the napkin-wrapped cookie, the absence of entitlement. A corner of his mouth lifted, not in amusement, but in satisfaction. Elijah felt his chest tighten. He didn't know who the man was, only that the room seemed to lean toward him, waiting. Preston excused himself from his circle, with a casual wave, and began walking across the floor. Each step was unhurried, deliberate, like a man who had never once been told no. Guests subtly parted to let him through, some glancing at Elijah with something close to pity, others with curiosity sharpened by anticipation. Elijah's hand trembled around the cookie. He considered putting it back. He considered running, but his feet wouldn't move. Preston Lockridge stopped directly in front of him, blocking the lights, casting a shadow that felt colder than the winter outside. He looked down at Elijah, then at the cookie, then back at Elijah again, his smirk settling into place like it had been waiting all night. And that was when Mia returned, just in time to see the most powerful man in the room standing over her son. The music continued, violins rising and falling as if nothing had changed, but the air in the ballroom stiffened so abruptly it felt brittle. Conversations thinned into whispers, then into silence that clung to the chandeliers and polished floors. Preston Lockridge stood directly in front of Elijah, close enough that the boy could smell expensive cologne layered over something sharper. Authority, expectation, entitlement. Preston did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. He had never needed to. "What are you doing here, boy?" he asked. The word landed heavy. Not shouted, not questioned. Declared. It cut through the music with precision. Designed not just for Elijah but for everyone watching. Heads turned fully now. Some guests stared openly. Others pretended not to notice, suddenly fascinated by their champagne glasses or the ceiling. The servers froze mid-step, eyes lowered, trained by experience to disappear when discomfort entered the room. Elijah felt his throat tighten. His fingers clenched around the napkin-wrapped cookie, the paper crinkling softly, embarrassingly loud in the silence. He tried to speak, but his mouth felt dry, his thoughts scattering. He looked instinctively toward his mother. Mia had stopped a few steps away. Her heart slammed against her ribs as she took in the scene. The posture, the proximity, the way Preston's body blocked her son from the room as if he were an obstacle to be corrected. She recognized the look on Preston's face. She had seen it before on managers, supervisors, people who smiled while shrinking her. It was the look of someone enjoying the imbalance. "He's with me," Mia said, stepping forward. Her voice was steady, though every muscle in her body begged her to retreat. "We were invited." Preston finally looked at her, eyes flicking over her dress, her shoes, the way she held herself. His expression didn't change, but something hardened behind his gaze. He smiled thinly. "Invited," he repeated, tasting the word as if it were foreign. He glanced toward the registration table, then back at her. "This is a private event. For families. For contributors. For people who understand the space they're in." Elijah felt heat, rush to his face. He understood more than they thought. He always did. Mia swallowed. There must have been a mistake, she said carefully. But we're here now. We won't be any trouble. Preston looked back down at Elijah, deliberately excluding her from the exchange. Trouble isn't always loud, he said. Sometimes it's just misplaced. A ripple of discomfort moved through the crowd. A woman near the bar shifted uneasily. A man cleared his throat, then looked away. No one intervened. Preston leaned slightly closer to Elijah, lowering his voice just enough to feel intimate, conspiratorial. You like cookies? He asked, nodding at the napkin. Elijah nodded before he could stop himself. Preston smiled again, wider this time. These are for guests, he said, not for staff children wandering around unsupervised. The words stung more than the tone. Staff children, wandering, unsupervised. Elijah felt something inside him shrink, curl inward. He looked down at the cookie, suddenly ashamed of wanting it. He started to extend his hand, to put it back. Keep it, Preston said quickly, holding up a hand. I wouldn't want you to think I'm unkind. A few guests chuckled softly, relieved laughter, the kind that comes when cruelty is dressed as civility. Preston straightened, his voice lifting just enough to carry. But you should understand something, he continued. This place has rules, traditions. It's important children learn early where they belong. Saves confusion later. Mia's breath caught. Don't speak to my son like that. Preston turned to her slowly. Like what? He asked, mock innocence in his eyes. I'm offering guidance. Something a young man like him might not get elsewhere. Elijah felt tears press behind his eyes. He hated them for coming. He hated that his body betrayed him even when he tried to be strong. He stared at the floor, focusing on the reflection of the lights. Anything to keep from crying in front of these people. Preston noticed. Of course he did. There it is, he said softly. That look. That's exactly why this isn't the right environment for him. Too much stimulation, too many expectations. The humiliation wasn't accidental. It was layered, intentional, delivered with a smile and an audience. Preston wasn't just removing Elijah, he was teaching him a lesson, branding it into memory. Mia stepped fully between them now, her hands trembling at her sides. We're leaving, she said. You don't have to. No, Preston interrupted, holding up a finger. I think it's important we do this properly. He gestured subtly, and a security guard at the edge of the room straightened, watching. Preston didn't look at him. He didn't have to. This is a family tradition, Preston continued, his voice calm, measured. We open our home to people who respect it. Allowing exceptions sends the wrong message. Elijah looked up then, something flickering behind his fear. I wasn't doing anything, he said quietly. The room seemed to inhale. Preston looked genuinely surprised for a split second, then amused. I didn't say you were, he replied. But intent doesn't change perception. Mia reached for Elijah's shoulder, grounding him. We'll go, she repeated. We don't want any trouble. Preston smiled at her, satisfied. Good, he said. I appreciate cooperation. As Mia turned, guiding Elijah toward the exit, Preston added casually, You know, we donate a lot to programs for underprivileged youth. Opportunities. Exposure. But those things work best when there's structure. Boundaries. Elijah felt something snap, not loud, not explosive, but sharp. He stopped walking. I just wanted a cookie, he said, barely above a whisper. The words weren't defiant. They were honest. And somehow that made them unbearable. A murmur rippled through the crowd. A woman near the tree pressed her lips together. A man shifted uncomfortably. The discomfort grew, spreading, threatening to turn into something else. Preston's smile faltered for the first time. He looked at Elijah, really looked, as if reassessing the situation. The boy wasn't yelling, wasn't causing a scene. He was just standing there, holding a cookie, eyes shining with unshed tears, surrounded by wealth that had decided he was invisible. Preston recovered quickly. And now you have one, he said. Lesson learned. Mia pulled Elijah closer, her jaw tight. She felt the room watching, waiting for her to either shrink or explode. She did neither. As they reached the edge of the ballroom, a voice cut through the tension, low, steady, impossible to ignore. That's enough, Preston. The words didn't shout. They didn't plead. They carried weight, the kind that came from someone who had nothing to prove and nothing to lose. Preston froze mid-step. Slowly he turned toward the voice, his expression darkening as an older man emerged from the crowd, eyes sharp, posture unyielding, walking forward with quiet authority that shifted the room all over again. The man who interrupted Preston Lockridge stood tall despite the stoop of his age. His silver beard was neat, his coat tailored in a way that suggested wealth, but not the performative kind. This was old quiet money, respect earned, not flaunted. His name, whispered by guests, was Ambrose Whitlow, a former civil rights attorney turned philanthropist, known for building libraries and tearing down illusion. But what most didn't know, what even Preston had forgotten, was that Ambrose had once stood toe-to-toe with a Lockridge in court, and nearly brought the family's name to its knees. "Preston," Ambrose said again, his voice calm, his eyes unblinking. "I said that's enough." The crowd hushed in a new way now. Not out of fear, but reverence. Ambrose's presence didn't demand silence. It inspired it. Preston's jaw tensed, but he couldn't bark at this man the way he did at the help. He straightened his jacket instead, pasting on a false smile. "Ambrose," he said coolly. "Didn't expect to see you this year." "Clearly," Ambrose replied, his eyes sliding to Elijah and Mia. "Though I imagine you wish fewer people had seen what just happened." Preston laughed under his breath. "Let's not turn a moment of confusion into a lecture, shall we? The boy has more dignity than this entire ballroom combined," Ambrose said, stepping forward. "You humiliated a child over a cookie. Is that the tradition you are preserving?" The guests were no longer watching a spectacle. They were witnessing a reckoning. Preston's face twitched. "We have standards here. It's not about the child, it's about setting precedent. Order." Ambrose smiled faintly. "You mean the same order your grandfather set when he refused to lease land to returning black veterans after World War II? Or when your father lobbied to redraw district lines to keep their children out of your schools?" Several guests shifted uncomfortably. These weren't topics they expected at a gala. "I'm sure your memory's sharp enough to recall Elijah Simmons' grandfather," Ambrose continued. "Thomas Simmons, served in the Pacific, came home with medals, and nothing else, promised farmland that never materialized. You know why?" Preston didn't respond. "Because your family's foundation outbid him," Ambrose answered for him. Then turned the land into a golf course. Called it Victory Greens. "I remember, because I represented Mr. Simmons when he tried to sue." "You remember how that case ended?" Preston stared at Ambrose like a snake sizing up an opponent. It couldn't quite strike. Ambrose turned to Elijah and Mia. "Your grandfather was one of the best men I ever knew, and I'm sorry I didn't win that case. I'm sorry the world let him be erased like that. But tonight, I see something he left behind, and I promise you there are people who remember, and people who are still fighting." Elijah's eyes welled again, but this time not from shame, from the strange shock of being seen. Mia gripped his hand tightly, overcome but holding it in. This wasn't just a defense. It was a resurrection. Her father's name, buried in silence for decades, now spoken like a battle cry in the very halls of those who wronged him. But if Ambrose's words were a fire, Preston's eyes were ice. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only a few could hear. "I suggest you tread carefully, old man," Preston hissed. "You think legacy is a weapon, but I own this place. These people. That boy's grandfather was just another statistic. I buried that scandal once. I'll do it again." Ambrose smiled, calm as winter. "History has a habit of unearthing itself, and so do secrets." Preston narrowed his eyes. "What secrets?" Before Ambrose could answer, a phone rang sharply, cutting through the air like a warning shot. It was Mia's. She fumbled for it, startled by the suddenness, and glanced at the screen. The caller ID said Marcia Gordon, a name she hadn't heard in years. She stepped away, her heart pounding, answering cautiously. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was familiar. Older now, but unmistakable. "Mia? It's Marcia, your dad's old friend, from the service office." Mia's breath caught. "Marcia? Is everything okay?" There was a long pause. "I found something. An envelope. In your father's old file. I should have mailed it years ago, but I didn't know where you were. And now you're going to want to see this. It's about the Lockridges." Mia turned her back to the room, her fingers gripping the phone tighter. "What is it?" "A letter," Marcia said. "Signed. From the Lockridge patriarch himself, confessing to something about a land agreement, saying the family owed Thomas Simmons restitution. Real numbers, real estate, names. It was hidden in the back of his file, marked confidential." Mia's knees went weak. "Why now?" "Because I saw that video your son was in. On social media. It's spreading, Mia. And I remembered the name. Simmons. I couldn't stay quiet." Mia's mind spun. Her father had always suspected foul play. He'd talked about it sometimes, late at night, when he thought she wasn't listening. About land he was promised, documents that disappeared, meetings that ended in silence, but he never had proof. Now here it was, or at least a thread. "Can you send it to me?" Mia asked, her voice shaking. "I already did," Marcia said. "Check your email." "I scanned it just now." Mia ended the call and turned back toward the ballroom. Elijah looked at her, sensing something had shifted again. She didn't speak. She simply reached into her purse, pulled out her phone, and tapped her inbox. 1. Unread message. Subject line: confidential. Simmons Estate, Lockridge, Foundation. She opened it. The letter appeared on the screen, slightly yellowed, scanned with the timestamp of decades ago. The Lockridge family crest in the corner. Below it, a typed admission of misfiled land claims, an acknowledgement of disproportionate acquisition of property, meant for veteran Thomas Simmons, and at the bottom, a signature: Walter E. Lockridge, Preston's father. Mia felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. She looked up, scanning the room, heart hammering in her chest. This wasn't just an apology. This was a legal admission. If this letter was real, it meant that the land the Lockridges built their empire on, at least in part, had been taken under false pretenses. And more importantly, it meant that the Simmons family might still have claim to it. She didn't speak. Not yet. Her face remained calm as she slid the phone back into her purse, her mind already racing ahead. This was no longer about a cookie or a moment. This was about inheritance, legacy, truth. As the violins resumed their gentle swell, and the party slowly stirred back to life, Mia stepped beside Elijah again and whispered, "We're not leaving." He looked up at her, confused. "Why?" She didn't answer. Instead, her eyes found Preston across the room. He was watching her, still smug, still untouchable. But Mia smiled, just barely, because Preston Lockridge had no idea that the very land he was standing on might not belong to him at all. Mia turned to find a Lockridge maid silently staring at her, her expression unreadable, and clearly, she had overheard everything. The night had thickened into something else now, more than just glittering wine glasses and rehearsed laughter. Beneath the strings of warm fairy lights and the polished floors, there was an undercurrent humming with tension. Secrets had begun to stir, and Mia Simmons stood just beyond the ballroom doors, her breath forming soft clouds in the winter air, gripping her phone like it held a weapon. Marcia's voice still echoed in her ears. "If that letter is real, Mia, your father never just worked the Lockridge land. He may have had a legal and personal claim to it." Mia's hand trembled as she scrolled again through the scanned letter. Walter Lockridge's signature stared back at her like a ghost caught red-handed. But there was more. Attached was a second document, unearthed from deeper in her father's personal file. A handwritten note. Unofficial, undated, no letterhead. It was in her grandmother's handwriting. Mia hadn't seen those looping cursive lines in over 20 years. But she remembered them vividly from Sunday letters her grandmother used to send before she passed. This note, though, was different. It was raw, secretive. Half a confession, half a plea. Her great-grandmother had written it to a friend, and it told of a quiet, taboo affair between a young Walter Lockridge, Preston's father, and herself. The timeline placed it during a time when Walter was still unmarried, but when such relationships, especially interracial ones, were scandalous enough to ruin dynasties. "He said he loved me, but love wasn't enough in his world. I carried the child. He asked me to stay quiet, said it would be better that way for both our lives. He promised the child would be taken care of. He lied." Mia stared at the note, the old anger it carried still burning fresh through every faded line. Her father, Thomas Simmons, had always known something didn't add up about the way the Lockridges treated him. He used to joke bitterly that he was almost family. Now Mia understood why. If the documents were legitimate, and Marcia swore she'd had them verified by a notary, then the land Thomas was denied wasn't just about race or class. It was personal. It was family being erased on purpose. In Elijah wasn't just the grandson of a man wronged. He was a direct descendant of the Lockridge bloodline. As she exhaled, trying to absorb the weight of it all, she heard a faint crunch behind her boots on gravel. Mia turned slowly. A Lockridge maid stood just outside the side entrance of the ballroom, half in shadow, half in moonlight. Young, maybe early 20s, Latina with deep brown eyes and a careful stillness in her posture. She said nothing, but Mia could tell she had been standing there long enough to hear everything. Their eyes locked. "Who are you?" Mia asked gently, but her voice was taut. The maid didn't speak immediately. She glanced around, confirming they were alone. Then she stepped forward, close enough for her voice to stay low. "I'm just staff," she said. "Like you used to be. But I'm not deaf, and I'm not blind." Mia stiffened. "You heard my call?"
I didn't mean to, the maid said quickly. I was out here on my break, just sitting, but I heard you say the name Lockridge and Simmons, and I heard affair, so yes, I heard.
Mia's fingers curled around her phone protectively. "I don't want trouble," the maid added. "I don't even want to keep working here. I'm leaving next month. I just—" She hesitated, then looked Mia square in the eyes. "You're not the only one who knows what they've buried." Mia's breath caught. "What are you saying?" The maid looked around again, then lowered her voice further. "There's a locked room, on the 3rd floor. Nobody talks about it. Staff aren't allowed up there. But once 2 years ago, I was helping an estate organizer clean out old boxes. She left me alone for a few minutes. I peeked in." Mia said nothing, afraid to interrupt the moment. There were pictures, papers, black and white photos of a black woman and a Lockridge man, intimate. Some looked posed. Others, like snapshots from a home, they looked happy. Mia's stomach flipped. "I asked the organizer who they were," the maid continued. "She got real nervous, told me not to mention it, that it was family history. But the way she said it, she meant scandal, not history." Mia inhaled sharply. "Do you remember her name?" "Ms. Liddell. Helen Liddell. She's not on staff anymore. I think she lives in Chicago now. But she was here a long time. Knew all the old records. Said she used to archive the family papers after Walter died." Mia's mind raced. These weren't coincidences. The woman her great-grandmother described, the relationship, the betrayal, it all lined up. And if there were photos, documents, something still preserved in that locked room, it could blow the Lockridge name off its pedestal completely. The maid shifted again, suddenly anxious. "I should go before someone sees me talking to you. But you should know. Preston keeps that room sealed. He never lets anyone inside. Not even cleaners. Only a few family members have keys." "Thank you," Mia said, voice trembling with the weight of it. "Really?" The maid gave a sad smile. "They've hurt a lot of people. If you can change that, maybe it's time." She turned and disappeared back into the side hall, leaving Mia alone with the cold, the documents, and a secret too big to stay hidden. She re-entered the ballroom slowly, trying to maintain composure. The lights felt brighter now, the colors too vivid, like the room itself didn't know its foundation was beginning to crack. Elijah spotted her first. His eyes were wide, alert, reading her expression with a depth beyond his years. "You okay?" he asked, voice low. Mia nodded but said nothing. She couldn't yet. Not here. Not with eyes still watching. She reached for his hand and squeezed. Just then a server approached with a tray of drinks. She moved to pass them, then paused. "I saw you talking to Maria," the woman said softly, almost hesitantly. Mia's heart skipped. The server leaned in just enough to whisper, "You need to be careful. If Preston finds out, he doesn't just ruin people. He erases them." Mia blinked. "Do you know her?" The server didn't answer. She just gave a quiet nod and walked away. Mia's instincts surged. Something bigger was unraveling here, and more people knew pieces of it than she expected. But it was also clear now, if she wanted the truth out, she'd have to move carefully. As she turned toward the edge of the room, her phone buzzed again. Another email. Subject line: urgent. Simmons, Lockridge Estate Inquiry. Sender Harold Foster, legal assistant, Chicago. Her hands shook as she tapped the message open. Inside was a simple note. "Miss Simmons, I believe we've come across your father's name in the Lockridge Land Trust files. Are you available to talk tonight?" Mia didn't even notice her feet moving toward the ballroom exit again. She needed air, needed to respond, needed to think. But just as she pushed open the side door, a voice behind her whispered, "Don't move." She turned slowly. Preston Lockridge stood just feet away, holding a half-empty glass of champagne, his smile thinner than paper. "We need to have a little conversation about who you've been speaking to tonight," he said, his voice soft but laced with warning. "Don't make this uglier than it has to be." Mia froze at Preston's words. The side door, still slightly ajar, let in a whisper of winter air that cooled her skin, but couldn't suppress the heat rising in her chest. She turned slowly to face him. Preston sipped his champagne, his posture relaxed, but his gaze surgical. His smile was tight, fake, something worn like a mask. "You've been asking questions," he said casually, "and I have to say, it's a bit distasteful." Tonight is supposed to be about joy, family, celebration, not stirring up ancient ghosts. Mia kept her voice low, steady. Is that what you call them? Ghosts? Preston's smile twitched. Let me give you a little advice. People like you, he paused, choosing the phrase like a surgeon selects a scalpel, often confuse curiosity with entitlement. But you should understand, not every locked door is meant to be opened. Mia didn't flinch. That's funny. I always thought secrets had a way of opening themselves. He laughed. Just once. Cold. You've had your fun, Mia. Don't push it. Elijah's a sweet boy. You don't want him caught in something above his understanding. With that, Preston took a slow sip of his drink and walked away like he'd just delivered a sermon, not a threat. Mia stood motionless for a moment, then re-entered the ballroom. But something had shifted again. She could feel it. The guests were looser now, drunker, more careless in their conversations. The party was peaking, and that meant the masks were slipping. She found Elijah near the back of the room. He had been pulled into a group of kids his age, most of them dressed in miniature versions of adult opulence, sweaters with gold threads, designer shoes, watches more expensive than Mia's monthly rent. Elijah stood out in his faded blazer, his posture unsure but upright. He was trying to blend, but his eyes were scanning, always scanning. A blond boy with slicked back hair and the confidence of inherited power stepped into the center of the circle, holding a velvet sack. Secret Santa time, he announced. Name tags were assigned earlier. If you didn't get one, he paused and smirked. Well, sucks for you. The crowd of kids laughed, loud and cruel. One girl nudged Elijah with a fake smile. Did you get a name tag? Elijah shook his head slowly. He hadn't even known the game was happening. No one had told him. The blond boy reached into the sack and pulled out a gift wrapped in shiny red paper. He read the tag aloud. To Ivy. From your Secret Santa. A younger girl stepped forward, cheeks flushed, her shy smile hiding behind waves of red curls. She took the gift, and the crowd clapped dramatically. Over the top. Gift after gift followed. Laughter, squeals, inside jokes. Elijah watched in silence. When the last gift was handed out, the blond boy made a big show of checking the sack and frowning. Huh? He said loudly. One name not listed. Wonder why? Someone in the group whispered, and someone else giggled. The blond boy continued. I guess even Santa knows some names don't belong on the list. Elijah blinked. He wasn't sure if he misheard, but then a brunette girl near him muttered. Should have brought a chimney sweep gift. The laughter came again, crueler this time. Knowing targeted, not even masked anymore. Elijah stepped back, his throat burning. He didn't want to cry. He refused. But the burn was real, deep, and rising. He turned to walk away, hoping he could vanish without giving them the satisfaction. His foot hit a slick patch on the marble, decorative wax from one of the holiday centerpieces, and in 1 second, his balance gave out. He fell, hard, hands scraping against cold stone, as his knees hit with a sharp crack. The laughter exploded. Not just the kids. A few adults nearby even chuckled before catching themselves. Someone muttered, "That's what happens when you don't belong." No one moved to help him, not one, until a hand reached down, small, pale, and firm. Elijah looked up, confused. A girl stood above him. Blonde but not the loud, mocking kind. Her hair was tied back in a soft braid. Her winter dress modest. Classic. She looked about his age. Her eyes weren't smug. They were steady. Ivy, she said simply. Elijah hesitated. Come on, she added. Let's get out of here. He took her hand. As she helped him up, the laughter around them quieted. Part awkwardness, part disbelief. Ivy turned toward the group, expression unreadable. Don't worry, she said, voice calm, clear. The marble's hard on all kinds of people. A few kids looked away, embarrassed. Others rolled their eyes, but Elijah wasn't looking at them anymore. He was looking at Ivy. They stepped out of the circle and toward a quieter corner of the room. Why'd you help me? Elijah asked, still brushing off his pants. Ivy shrugged. Because it was disgusting what they did. They're your friends, he said softly. No, she replied. They're just people I'm forced to smile around. Elijah looked at her again, differently now. She wasn't like the others. Ivy reached into the small clutch she carried and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, folded, wrinkled, like it had been hidden hastily. I found this on my dad's desk, she whispered. He's one of Preston's lawyers. He brought it home by mistake after a strategy meeting. Elijah hesitated. What is it? I don't understand most of it, Ivy admitted. But it has your mom's name on it, and your grandfather's, and Preston signed it. Like, he's trying to fight something, erase something. Elijah stared at the paper. His hands felt too cold to open it. Why are you giving it to me, he asked. Because you deserve to know the truth, Ivy said. Even if it breaks their whole house down. Elijah took the crumpled paper, his fingers trembling. He didn't know what was in it yet, but he already felt the weight of it. A buried truth. A piece of a puzzle no one wanted him to have. He looked around the room again. The laughter had returned, but it felt different now. Distant, hollow. Mia appeared at the far end of the hall, searching the crowd, until her eyes found Elijah. He held up the paper slightly, just enough for her to see. Her face changed. She knew. Something had shifted for good. But before either of them could speak, Elijah felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned. It was Preston Lockridge. His expression wasn't angry. It was composed, chilling. I believe that paper belongs to me, he said. Before Elijah could speak, a hand reached between them and snatched the paper away. Preston's daughter had been watching the entire time, and she wasn't on her father's side. For a brief moment, everything stood still. Elijah's fingers, still slightly scraped from the fall, clutched the crumpled paper, as if it were nothing more than a strange party favor. But his heart knew better. Something about the way Ivy had slipped it to him, the weight of her words, the quick warning glance she gave afterward. It all screamed danger and revelation. The note felt alive in his hand. Heavy. Electric. Then he heard the words that pulled gravity into the center of his chest. I believe that paper belongs to me. Elijah turned slowly. Preston Lockridge stood just inches away, towering over him with the poise of someone used to owning the air around them. His velvet jacket still perfectly pressed, his jaw tight but his tone even controlled. A storm masked in sophistication. But behind his eyes, there was something else now. Fear. Controlled, measured, but real. The kind of fear only the powerful feel when the ground beneath them shifts without warning. Before Elijah could respond, a hand shot between them and snatched the letter from his grip. Everyone froze. It was Savannah Lockridge, Preston's only daughter. She was 18, dressed in a sleek white cocktail dress. Her honey blonde hair curled to perfection, but her expression was nothing like her father's. Her blue eyes burned with betrayal. Her movements were sharp, almost impulsive. She hadn't meant to make a scene, but it was too late for that. I saw you, she said, staring directly at Preston, her voice tight but steady. I saw you shredding copies of this last week in your office. You told Mom it was about taxes. But this is about them, isn't it? Preston's composure faltered for the briefest second. Savannah, he said slowly, voice like broken glass under velvet. Give that to me. She stepped back. No. Around them, guests began to turn their heads. The jazz quartet faltered slightly as one of the violinists looked up, catching the tension from across the room. A ripple moved through the party. No one understood what was happening, but they could feel it, and nothing drew attention in a rich man's world faster than a family argument with the volume turned down. Savannah unfolded the crumpled page. Her eyes scanned the lines quickly. Each word stabbed her harder than the last. She read aloud. We anticipate potential litigation involving illegitimate heirs and previously undocumented estate ties. Recommend aggressive settlement or total suppression. She looked up, her face pale. You knew this boy was connected to our family. Preston took a slow step forward. You don't understand what you're reading. I understand enough, she snapped. You're planning to erase someone just because they don't fit your version of the family tree. A stunned hush settled. Elijah's breathing grew shallow. Every nerve in his body pulsed. Savannah turned to him, softer now. This is real, isn't it? Elijah looked at her, then at his mother across the room, who was frozen in place, watching the scene unfold, like a nightmare she'd once imagined but never believed would happen out loud. Yes, Elijah said quietly. It's real. Savannah's jaw tightened. Then he doesn't get to hide this. She lifted the page higher and began walking toward the front of the room, where the gala's host microphone sat on its stand. Preston moved to intercept her, but Ivy stepped in front of him, arms folded, eyes fierce. Touch her, Ivy said calmly. And I'll post that letter to 10 news sites before midnight. Preston hesitated. The room had grown fully silent now. Even the waitstaff stood frozen. Savannah stepped up to the mic. Excuse me, she said, her voice shaky but loud. I know this is supposed to be a festive occasion, but I've just discovered something. Something my father has kept from many of us, and it concerns the history of this estate and the Simmons family. Mia gasped quietly. Elijah reached for her hand, squeezing it like it was the only thing anchoring him. Savannah held up the letter. This document confirms that the Lockridge family, my family, is actively suppressing a legal claim to this land that was denied to a war veteran named Thomas Simmons. Elijah Simmons' grandfather. Whispers broke out instantly. Phones lifted, flashlights turned on. It was spreading already. Preston's voice boomed from across the room. That letter is inadmissible and incomplete. This is slander. Savannah stepped down. No, she interrupted. This is the truth. A truth you've buried for decades. But I won't be a part of it. Not anymore. Gasps echoed across the room. Some of the older guests looked around, unsure whether to defend the Lockridge name or distance themselves entirely. Preston's hands clenched. Enough, he snapped. But the mic had already been cut. A tech assistant from the soundboard had discreetly silenced the system, likely on instinct, unsure if they were aiding or diffusing the chaos. Either way, the damage was done. Savannah turned and walked back toward Elijah. She handed the letter back to him. This isn't just paper, she whispered. It's the fuse. Then she walked past her father without looking at him, and out the front doors. The ballroom erupted. Mia rushed to Elijah's side. Are you okay? Elijah nodded, but his hands trembled. The note felt radioactive now. People were watching him like he had just transformed into someone else. Ivy leaned in. You need to get out of here. He'll come after you. Elijah looked around. Preston was standing perfectly still, breathing heavy, surrounded by his stunned guests. His face was unreadable, but dangerous. I don't think he'll let us leave without a fight, Elijah said quietly. Ivy pulled a small piece of paper from her clutch. Then take this. My dad's contact. He's not like the others. He's helped people go up against families like yours. Mia took the paper and read the name. Daniel Morgan, civil rights attorney. Why would your dad help us? Mia asked, cautious. Ivy shrugged. Because he used to work for Preston, until he didn't. Just then the lights flickered once, then twice. The sound system rebooted, and over the speaker came a new voice, a deep, confident tone. Ladies and gentlemen, it said, calm but uninvited. This is Daniel Morgan, and I'm on my way. The crowd froze again. Mia stared at the speakers, stunned. How did he know? Ivy smiled. Because I texted him. Suddenly, the ballroom doors slammed shut with a loud click, and from the far end of the room, 2 private security guards stepped forward, blocking the exits. Preston raised his hand slowly. I'm afraid, he said coldly. No one's leaving until this is handled. Preston Lockridge's smile returned the moment he raised his hand to the security team. Let's keep things calm, he said, voice smooth as silk, his tone a masterclass in social manipulation. We're simply going to address a little misunderstanding, nothing more. He moved through the stunned crowd, like a politician on a tightrope, gracious, commanding, untouchable. Guests parted for him with the same instinctive fear they might offer a wild animal dressed in a tuxedo. Elijah was still standing with Mia, his small hands clenched, the letter clutched tightly in one palm. He felt 1,000 eyes on him, some curious, others accusatory, a few quietly sympathetic but none brave enough to step forward. Preston approached them, with the calm of someone used to turning storms into photo ops. Elijah, he said, resting a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. Why don't we step aside? Just you and me. Man to man. Mia immediately stepped forward. Absolutely not. But Preston raised his other hand, the smile never leaving his face. Miss Simmons, I assure you, this is purely a conversation. No pressure, no threats, just clarity. You and your son have had quite a night. Let's not ruin it with confusion. Mia didn't budge. He's 12. You don't get private conversations with him. Preston leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice just enough for her ears. And if he walks out with that letter, you know exactly what comes next. Her jaw clenched. Elijah looked up at his mother. She met his gaze, searching for some sign of fear, of indecision. But what she found instead was fire. He gave a single nod. It's okay, he said softly. I want to hear what he has to say. Mia's face contorted. Her instinct screamed no. But she understood. This wasn't just about protection anymore. It was about power, and Elijah had stepped into it, whether they were ready or not. Preston led Elijah down the hall, flanked by one of his security men, who peeled off once they reached a wooden door near the east wing. The guests watched as they disappeared behind it. The door closed with a quiet final click. The study was dimly lit, lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves that smelled of age and wealth. A large mahogany desk sat in the center, flanked by high-back leather chairs and thick carpets that muffled every footstep. Preston gestured to a chair. "Have a seat." Elijah sat, spine straight, fists clenched in his lap. Preston poured himself a drink, neat whiskey, then sat across from the boy, watching him for a long, silent moment. "You know," he began, swirling the amber liquid, "there's something very dangerous about children who think they understand power." Elijah didn't flinch. Preston smirked. "Your mother thinks she's fighting for justice. She's not. She's trying to rewrite a world that was never built for her. That's not brave. That's naive." "And not my mother," Elijah replied. "No," Preston said, nodding. "You're a smart boy. Smarter than most. That's why I'm offering you a chance to walk away from this with something to show for it." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a white envelope. Thick, clean, heavy. "Take this," Preston said, setting it down between them. "It's more money than your mother makes in 2 years. And that's just the beginning. Walk out of here. Say nothing more about this. And I can open doors you don't even know exist." Elijah stared at the envelope. "And if I don't?" he asked. Preston's smile vanished like a curtain dropping. "Then you learn the hard way what happens to people who try to steal a seat at the table without an invitation." Elijah leaned back. "It's not stealing if it's mine. You don't belong here," Preston said, voice now cold. "You never did. This house wasn't built for you. This legacy wasn't shaped with your name in mind. You're a mistake trying to call itself history." Elijah slowly pulled the letter from his pocket and looked at it, not to wave it like a weapon, but to remind himself it was real, tangible. Then, without a word, he slipped it back into his blazer's inside pocket. "You can't buy me," Elijah said. Preston's nostrils flared. "Every name on every building in this town was bought. That's how the world works. You either accept the deal, or you disappear quietly." Elijah stood. "Then I guess you'll hear me loud." Preston rose too, his hand tightening around his glass. "You're making a mistake." "No," Elijah said. "You made it. A long time ago." Just then the study door creaked open. Standing in the doorway was a man in a dark blue coat, his tie loose, his face calm but firm. His presence filled the room like an unspoken threat, but it wasn't violence that he carried. It was law. Precision. History. "I believe that's enough," the man said. Preston froze. Daniel Morgan stepped into the room. His voice was even, his gaze fixed on Elijah. "I heard every word," he said, "from the moment you sat him down." Preston's mask cracked. "You have no legal right to—" "Actually," Daniel interrupted, pulling out a small recording device from his coat pocket. "I do. This is a single-party consent state, and your attempt to coerce a minor into silence on tape is going to make a fascinating exhibit." Elijah's mouth parted slightly. He hadn't expected backup to come so soon. "Not like this." Preston's hands shook. "You think you're going to take me down with some half-baked accusations and a bitter employee's daughter?" Daniel stepped forward. "No. I think he is." He looked at Elijah. "You ready, son?" Elijah nodded, slowly but surely. Preston's voice broke into a near whisper. "This will not end well for you." Daniel smiled faintly. "It already has. For you." As the three of them exited the study, the noise of the party beyond the doors had risen to chaos. Guests were murmuring loudly, phones out, whispers of lawsuits and family secrets spreading like smoke through the glittering halls. Mia rushed forward, grabbing Elijah, her hands moving over his shoulders like she needed to check he was still intact. "You okay?" she asked. Elijah nodded, then turned to Daniel. "Thank you." "You earned this," Daniel replied, but the moment of relief was short-lived. From across the room came a sudden crash. Glass shattering. A server dropped a tray, eyes fixed on a television mounted in the corner. The party's curated music stopped, and now for the first time a different sound filled the room. A live news broadcast. A reporter's voice. "We've just received exclusive footage from tonight's Lockridge Christmas Gala, where a boy named Elijah Simmons revealed a decades-long property cover-up by the powerful Lockridge family. The video, which already has over 2 million views." Every head turned toward the screen, and at the center of it, paused for the camera, was a frozen frame of Elijah, standing alone with the letter, lit by chandeliers. As gasps rippled through the crowd, Preston's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his face turned white. The Lockridge Board of Trustees had just scheduled an emergency vote. Without him, Daniel Morgan had spent his life navigating the sharp, narrow corridors of law and politics, places where truth was rarely enough, and justice came at a cost. Tonight, however, inside the glittering prison of the Lockridge estate, he was staring directly into a choice that would redefine everything: the truth in Elijah's trembling hands, or the comfort of his carefully constructed reputation. The study door closed softly behind them. Elijah and Mia stood near Daniel, uncertain, but trusting. Across the ballroom, the buzz of scandal had transformed the party into a panicked hive. Guests whispered behind raised champagne glasses, speculation clinging to every wall. The letter, the footage, the live broadcast. It was no longer containable. Daniel moved quickly, guiding Mia and Elijah toward a side hall, with minimal foot traffic. His mind was already working through the legal logistics: chain of custody, recorded threats, affidavit possibilities. But as much as the lawyer in him was alive and alert, the man was torn. The letter was enough to reopen the case he had once lost. 20 years ago, he'd stood in a courtroom with Thomas Simmons, Elijah's grandfather, trying to prove that the Lockridge estate had engaged in deliberate fraud, promising land in exchange for silence, then scrubbing the existence of those deals like fingerprints from gloves. But the jury hadn't cared. The evidence had been insufficient, the climate cold. Daniel had left that trial marked by failure. Now history was offering a second trial, with a new name on the line. But it wasn't simple. His firm Morgan and Bright LLP was entangled in Lockridge money. Their biggest client was a logistics subsidiary quietly owned by Lockridge Holdings. Losing them would collapse half the firm's operations. His partners wouldn't just be angry, they'd be ruined, and so would he. He slowed in the corridor, pulling out his phone. Ivy, a few steps behind, followed, her presence unwavering. "Dad," she said softly, "are we really doing this?" He looked at her. "You understand what this means?" "I do," Ivy said. "But if we don't, who will?" Daniel stared at his daughter, struck by how much she resembled his late wife in this moment. Calm in chaos, clear-eyed in the face of compromise. "Then yes," he said, his voice low. "We are." Mia stepped closer, protective. "Mr. Morgan, we didn't mean for any of this to happen. I know you have a career to protect. If this puts you in danger, we can find someone else." Daniel stopped her with a look. "This isn't charity," he said. "This is overdue." He opened his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the name Delilah Trask, investigative journalist, National Syndicate. They'd once worked on a gerrymandering expose together. She trusted him, and she loved a scandal, especially the kind that tied race, legacy, and wealth in a knot too thick for PR firms to untangle. He tapped the number and held the phone to his ear. It rang once, twice. Then her voice came through, half amused. "Daniel Morgan, you're calling me from the Lockridge Gala, aren't you?" He smiled faintly. "They say Christmas is forgiving. Who got exposed?" she asked immediately. "A boy," Daniel replied. "Elijah Simmons, grandson of a war vet. His mother's a cleaner. He got invited here by mistake. Now he's got a letter that proves Preston Lockridge buried a land theft scandal tied to a secret heir, possibly an interracial affair." Silence. Then Delilah, "Do you have the letter?" "I have a scan. I also have video, threats, witnesses, a recorded confession. I want it all." "You'll get it," Daniel said. "But I'm burning bridges to give it to you. I can't protect you from fallout." Delilah's laugh was short and sharp. "I don't need protection. I need the truth." Daniel nodded, then ended the call. Without hesitation, he turned and slammed the phone against the wall. The screen shattered. The casing split. Sparks flew. Mia jumped. "What are you?" "No trail," Daniel said calmly. "We don't leave digital footprints when fighting legacy money." Across the hall, Ivy stood near a group of young guests she'd known since childhood. Heirs, daughters, future board members of foundations built on silence. They were watching her now with expressions carved from judgment and betrayal. One girl with a pearl necklace muttered, "So you're really siding with them?" Ivy didn't flinch. "I'm siding with the truth." Another boy, one of the Secret Santa organizers, scoffed. "Must be nice pretending you're above all this, Ivy. Your family name is still Lockridge affiliated. Don't act like you're not just doing this to stand out." Ivy looked at them, each one familiar, and suddenly felt how foreign they had become. "I'm not trying to stand out," she said. "I'm trying not to vanish like all the people your family's erased." They said nothing after that. Daniel returned to the group. "We need to get out of here now. I've got backup coming, but if Preston wants to stop this, he'll do it before lawyers get involved." They moved quickly toward the rear of the house, cutting through a hallway that smelled of old wood and lemon polish. Staff peeked from corners but said nothing. One even nodded at Elijah, silently supportive. As they passed the grand staircase, Elijah paused. His eyes landed on a large oil painting, one he hadn't noticed before. It was a Lockridge patriarch from decades past, standing proudly on the same land that had been taken from his family. But what caught Elijah's eye was the shadowy figure behind the man, barely visible, darker skinned, face turned away. A servant, forgotten in the corner of the canvas. Elijah stared. I wonder if that was him, he said quietly. My great-grandfather. Mia placed a hand on his back. Maybe. Or maybe it's every man they ever stepped on. Daniel checked his watch. 2 minutes. Let's keep moving. As they neared the side door, they heard footsteps ahead. A man stood at the exit. Another security guard. He looked at Daniel. Sir, Mr. Lockridge says you're not authorized to leave yet. Daniel raised an eyebrow. He doesn't control the exits. The guard hesitated, then said, he does tonight. Before Daniel could reply, Ivy stepped forward. Let us through, she said. The guard frowned. Miss Lockridge, I said let us through, she repeated. Unless you want the board to know you stood between a child and justice. That did it. The guard stepped aside, lips tight, and opened the door. Cold air rushed in. Daniel, Mia, Elijah, and Ivy stepped out into the night, snow beginning to fall in soft, powdery flakes. A black car waited at the curb. Daniel opened the back door for Elijah and Mia. This is only the beginning, he said. Are you ready? Mia looked at her son, then at Daniel. We've been ready for generations. They got in, but before Daniel could follow, his phone, his backup burner buzzed in his coat pocket. A text, unknown number. Pull the plug, you're being watched. They know you called the press. Daniel looked up and saw a camera lens glinting from the edge of the rooftop across the estate. Someone was already recording their every move. The temperature inside the Lockridge mansion hadn't changed, but everything else had. The glittering warmth of holiday lights now felt blinding. The grandeur of the decor, the music, the champagne, all of it was hollow beneath the weight of a truth that had clawed its way to the surface. Preston Lockridge's smile had vanished. The guests, once fawning and polished, had turned into something else entirely. Half confused, half complicit. Whispers filled the halls like a second soundtrack, mingling with the muted clinks of glasses, and the distant jazz trio trying desperately to pretend this was still a party. Preston moved like a man tightening the noose of a narrative, weaving through clusters of his hand-picked elite, with short, sharp glances and muttered instructions. To staff, he said, escort the outliers to the side exit. To security, he said, separate them, discreetly. To guests, he said, everything's under control, just a misunderstanding. But to himself, he muttered what only power gives people the audacity to believe. No one gets out unless I say so. Mia, Elijah, Daniel, and Ivy had made it down the snow-dusted back steps, approaching the black car Daniel had ordered. But after the warning text and the flicker of a camera on the rooftop, Daniel paused. Something had changed again. Elijah, Daniel said, stopping. Get back in the house. What? Mia snapped. You just got us out. Daniel turned sharply. We're not safe out here. They know we've gone to the press. Preston's going to force this to end on his terms. And I'd rather be somewhere I can control the exits than a parked car surrounded by cameras I can't see. Even as he spoke, more of Preston's security detail began fanning out from the sides of the property men, with earpieces and matching suits. Not official police, but dangerous in the way loyalty paid by money always is. Ivy looked back at the estate. They're going to corner us if we go back in. Daniel's jaw clenched. Then we don't go back in as victims. They turned and re-entered through the side hall, slipping into a narrow corridor near the kitchen, where the opulence of the ballroom gave way to the hum of dishwashers, steam, and stainless steel. Staff turned to look at them, eyes wide, expressions torn. A few looked scared. Others looked relieved. Mia recognized one of the women, a younger Latina dishwasher who nodded slowly, silently, then opened a side storage door. Hide in there, she whispered. At least until they pass. But Elijah stepped forward. No, the woman blinked. What? I'm done hiding, he said. The storage room fell silent for a moment, and then Ivy stepped beside him. He's right. Back in the ballroom, Preston had taken the microphone, the same one his daughter had used earlier to shatter the illusion of Lockridge perfection. His voice echoed through the sound system, warm but warning. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption earlier this evening. We had an unfortunate misunderstanding involving one of our guests and a misinterpreted document. I assure you the matter is being handled with sensitivity and discretion. His words were calculated, carefully chosen, not to inflame, but to suggest contamination. Sensitivity and discretion. A kind of phrasing that made it easy to dismiss injustice as inconvenience. He gestured towards security. Some guests may be asked to leave, he added. This is purely for their safety and the peace of our gathering. The words struck Elijah harder than any insult. For their safety, as if they were the threat, the danger, the stain. Daniel turned to Mia. If they isolate us, they'll spin this like we were intruding, disrupting. We need eyes. We need people watching. Phones up. Records. Or we'll vanish, and the narrative goes with us. Ivy pulled out her phone and sent a quick text. What did you do? Daniel asked. I asked some of the others for help. The others? The kids. The ones still on the fence. Some of them have hearts. They're just buried under fear. And she was right, because less than a minute later, 3 teenagers slipped into the service corridor. One carried a phone already streaming live. Another held a large speaker backpack still playing music, a jarring contrast to the tension in the air. We saw what happened, the boy said. We're with you. Preston's going to flip, one girl added. But he can't stop the footage. At that moment, 2 security guards rounded the corner and spotted the group. Everyone not employed here needs to come with us, one of them said firmly. Elijah stepped forward. Are we under arrest? No. Then we're not going anywhere. The guard stiffened. You're trespassing. This is a party we were invited to, Mia snapped. And we haven't done a single illegal thing. Daniel stepped in. And if you touch a child under my counsel without cause, you'll find yourself subpoenaed in federal court before sunrise. The guard hesitated, then glanced at the camera in the teenager's hand. Love stream still going. He stepped back. Ivy smiled faintly. That's what I thought. And then, in the distance, the first sound of sirens pierced the cold night air. Elijah froze. So did Preston, halfway through another empty assurance in the ballroom. His head turned toward the doors. A flicker of annoyance passed through his face. Then satisfaction. He knew what was coming. Outside, red and blue lights splashed against the mansion's front gates, coloring the snow in urgent flashes. A private security van and 3 patrol cars pulled up to the estate. But these weren't officers there to protect Elijah. These were the other kind. Preston's kind. The kind who answered when rich men made calls. The doors burst open. Uniformed officers entered, followed by a plainclothes man with a clipboard and smug detachment. We've received a complaint, he announced. Disturbance of peace. Possible theft of private documents. We're here to investigate. Elijah and Mia were immediately singled out. The officer's eyes scanned the group and landed on Elijah. You! Step forward, Daniel intervened. He's a minor, and he's not speaking without legal counsel present. The officer didn't even look at him. Counsel or not, if he has property that doesn't belong to him, we have the right to confiscate and question. Mia pulled Elijah behind her. You'll have to go through me. Is that a threat? The officer asked. No, she said. It's a fact. From behind them, a voice rang out. It's also a violation of protocol. The entire room turned. Ambrose Whitlow had entered quietly, leaning heavily on a cane, but his presence still drew gravity like a black hole. His voice was crisp, measured, lethal in its certainty. You're detaining a child based on a rich man's word, without a warrant or probable cause. That's harassment. And if I know this city's press, and I do, by morning, every paper will print the name of every officer in this room. The officer shifted uncomfortably. Sir, with respect. No. With law, Ambrose interrupted. If you want to take that child, you better have a damn good reason. Because I will rain down the kind of legal fire you've only read about in textbooks. The room went dead quiet. And then the final twist. One of the teenagers still live streaming shouted, 20,000 viewers. And counting. The officer stepped back. Preston stood at the top of the stairs, glaring down at the mess his control had become. His perfect party. His invincible image, all dissolving beneath the weight of one child, and one letter. But he wasn't done yet. As he turned and whispered something to his assistant, a new expression spread across his face, one of cold calculation. A minute later, Ivy received a text. Her face paled. She showed it to Daniel. They're going after your firm. Full audit. Tonight. Snow dusted the gravel of the Lockridge estate like icing over rot. The pristine beauty of it masked the rising storm underneath. A storm not made of weather, but of truth, lies, and the weight of inherited injustice. Outside the mansion's towering front gates, The flashing blue and red lights painted the white landscape in bursts of urgency. 2 police cruisers idled, steam rising from their hoods. The responding officers were already tense, not because of what was happening, but because of who had summoned them. Preston Lockridge. He stood at the top of the grand stairs again, arms folded behind his back, the model of dignified concern. His voice, calm and perfectly modulated, was feeding the officers a carefully constructed version of events, one in which he was the aggrieved party. There was a coordinated disruption, Preston said, loud enough for the gathered guests to hear. An attempt to manufacture a public spectacle, using falsified documents. The situation escalated quickly. I feared for the safety of my guests, particularly the children. He made sure to say children with just enough paternal warmth to make himself sound heroic. I'm requesting that those individuals be questioned thoroughly, especially the boy and his mother. Inside the mansion, Elijah and Mia were still in the hallway near the service wing, surrounded by Daniel, Ivy, and a small cluster of supporters. But that protection was thinning now. The guests who had shown solidarity earlier were beginning to back away, afraid, calculating, retreating into the privilege that allowed them to opt out when the tension got too real. Daniel's phone buzzed again. Another anonymous text. 2 of the cops are Lockridge connected. Be careful what's said. He swallowed the rising dread. We need to get ahead of this. Just then, a loud knock echoed from the main doors. It was the police. Elijah instinctively stepped behind his mother, who tightened her grip on his arm. Her eyes were locked on the officers approaching. White, sharp-eyed, moving like predators under the guise of protocol. You the Simmons family? The lead officer asked, his voice flat but weighted. Mia nodded. Yes, we need to speak with you outside, now. Daniel moved forward. They're not under arrest. If you have questions, you can ask them here. The second officer stepped in. We've received multiple complaints. Loud disturbances, trespassing, potential theft. We're within our right to conduct an investigation. Trespassing? Mia echoed. We were invited. Don't raise your voice, ma'am. The officer snapped quickly. Mia's shoulders straightened. Her mouth clamped shut, but her eyes said everything. Daniel stepped between them. There are witnesses, video, documentation of who gave them access and why. You don't get to detain a mother and her son because a billionaire feels embarrassed. The officer ignored him. His gaze had locked on Elijah now. You, he said, step outside. Now. I'm 12, Elijah said, voice tight. I didn't do anything. Ivy, standing just behind him, lifted her phone and started recording. The screen reflected in the officer's eyes. He flinched, just slightly. You're making this worse for yourself, he muttered. No, Ivy said, you're making it worse for yourself. Outside, a crowd of guests had started to spill onto the front steps, murmuring, their curiosity outweighing their discomfort. They watched as Mia and Elijah were led out of the mansion, hands raised in confusion and fury. The moment Elijah's shoes touched the snow-covered gravel, one of the officers roughly grabbed his wrist. Hey! Mia shouted. You're under investigation, the officer said. Put your hands behind your back. You're arresting a child? Ivy's voice broke through, filled with disbelief and rage. Phones lifted. Guests began recording. Daniel surged forward. I said he is not under arrest. The officer ignored him. Handcuffs clicked around Elijah's wrists. Next, Mia. They didn't ask. They simply reached, grabbed, twisted her arms back, and fastened cold metal around them. Cameras captured every angle. The black mother and her child standing in the falling snow, handcuffed under mansion lights, surrounded by white uniforms and sharper silence. Preston stood inside, just behind the glass doors, his silhouette watching. Inside her coat, Ivy tapped furiously on her phone. She uploaded the footage with a caption, "This is what trespassing looks like when you're black at a billionaire's party." Elijah Simmons, Lockridge cover-up. Within 3 minutes, the video crossed 500,000 views. By 5 minutes, it was trending on 3 platforms, but none of that helped Elijah in the moment. The cuffs bit into his wrists. He stared out at the officers, the crowd, the cameras, feeling a sick swirl of emotions, shame, rage, fear. He had done nothing wrong, and still, here he was, criminalized for existing too loudly, in a space not built for him. I want to go home, he whispered. Mia leaned toward him, her hands bound behind her, her voice breaking. You're going to be okay. I promise.
But she didn't know.
None of them did. The officer gestured toward the back seat of the squad car. Put him in. No, Daniel barked, stepping forward again. You detain that boy, and I swear to God you will be sued into retirement. You don't even have cause. You haven't read them their rights. You're live on 6 different platforms right now. Do you understand what that means? Still, the officer opened the door. That's when a voice, deep, smooth, unmistakably commanding, cut through the noise. Step away from the boy. Every head turned. A black patrol officer, tall and solid, approached from the second cruiser. His badge was polished, his presence undeniable. The white officer hesitated. It's procedure. We've got, I said, step away. The man's eyes were locked on Elijah. He walked up, slow, deliberate, until he was just a few feet away from the boy. The falling snow caught on his jacket, shoulders untouched by urgency. He crouched slightly. I know who you are, he said to Elijah. Elijah blinked.
What?
I knew your grandfather, the officer continued. Thomas Simmons. He served in Korea with my uncle. He was one of the first black men to file a land claim in this county. He taught Sunday school. He was a hero. Elijah's eyes widened. You knew him? The officer nodded, and I saw what happened to him. I saw how they erased him, and I swore I'd remember his name. He stood again and turned to the other officers. You're not taking this boy. You're not taking his mother. Not tonight. Not on my watch. The lead officer stepped forward. You're breaking chain of command. I'm upholding the law, the black officer said. And if you want to arrest someone, try the man who forged land titles and threatened a child. Daniel exhaled slowly, the tension in his chest finally loosening. Ivy clutched her phone tighter. The live stream was still climbing. Now over 1 million. Mia's cuffs were removed first. Then Elijah. As the metal fell from his wrists, Elijah looked up at the officer. Thank you. No, the man said quietly. Thank you. For not giving in. Preston, still behind the glass, watched everything unfold with a clenched jaw and twitching eye. Everything was slipping. But the night had more to say. One of the guests, a quiet older woman near the back of the crowd, stepped forward. In her trembling hands, she held an old photograph of a black woman and a Lockridge man, embracing. I think it's time I said what I've been hiding for 40 years, she said. Officer Jamal Ricks had learned early that memory could be a form of resistance. Growing up on the east side of Oak Ridge, he heard the same stories whispered on porches and repeated in barbershops, the kind of stories that never made it into textbooks. The Lockridge estate wasn't just a mansion on a hill. It was a monument to what had been taken, renamed and sealed away. Jamal knew the names that vanished from records. He knew which streets used to belong to whom. And he knew Thomas Simmons. He remembered Thomas as a man who stood straight, even when the world bent him. A veteran who came home with a spine full of pride and a pocket full of promises that never materialized. Jamal was a kid then, tagging along behind his uncle to community meetings where Thomas spoke calmly about land deeds and missing files, about meetings that ended without minutes, about doors that closed softly but permanently. When Thomas died too young and too quietly, Jamal remembered how the questions died with him, or so the town wanted. So when Jamal saw Elijah Simmons standing in the snow with cuffs biting into his wrists, the past surged forward like it had been waiting for permission. The mansion loomed behind the boy, unchanged, smug in its permanence. The same gates, the same lights, the same posture of ownership. Jamal felt a tightening in his chest that had nothing to do with procedure. He approached slowly, deliberately, letting the moment stretch so everyone could see him choose what he was about to do. Step away from the boy, he had said, and meant it in a way that did not invite debate. Now as the cuffs lay on the ground and the crowd breathed again, Jamal stood between Elijah and the officers who had arrived ready to make a mess disappear. He looked at the lead officer, meeting his gaze with a steadiness learned over years of being underestimated. You want to write this up, Jamal said evenly. Write it clean. No fishing. No intimidation. We're done here. The officer bristled. You don't get to. I do, Jamal replied, because I'm not protecting a donor. I'm protecting a child. The crowd murmured. Phones remained raised. Snow continued to fall, softening the edges of everything except the truth. Jamal turned back to Elijah and crouched slightly, bringing his voice down to something private in the middle of a public reckoning. You okay? Elijah nodded, though his hands still shook. They put cuffs on my mom, he said like it was a fact that needed to be recorded so it wouldn't be denied later. Jamal nodded once. I saw. He stood and motioned for another officer to remove Mia's cuffs fully and step back. When it was done, Jamal faced Mia, his expression gentler now. I'm sorry, he said. This shouldn't have happened. Mia studied him, searching for sincerity. She found it. Thank you, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. Jamal glanced toward the mansion. Preston Lockridge stood behind the glass, his silhouette framed by chandeliers and denial. Jamal felt the familiar anger rise. Not hot, not reckless, but cold and clarifying. They're going to spin this, Jamal said quietly, turning back to Mia and Elijah. They always do. Noise complaint, disturbance, trespassing, anything that sounds neutral enough to wash the stain away. Daniel stepped closer. We're already live. The footage is everywhere. Jamal nodded. That helps. But it's not enough. He looked at Elijah again, weighing something heavier than rank. Owning the story matters. Because if you don't, they'll rewrite it. And they're better at rewriting than anyone. Elijah swallowed. I don't want to be on TV. I know, Jamal said. And I won't push you. But understand this. Silence won't protect you. It never has. Ivy hovered nearby, her phone still in hand, comments streaming faster than she could read. She looked between Jamal and Elijah. It's already blowing up, she said. They're calling it a setup, saying the letter's fake. Daniel exhaled. They'll go after credibility next, dig through trash if they have to. Jamal straightened. That's why you don't hide. You go forward. Mia's eyes flashed. You're asking a child to step into a firestorm. I'm asking him to decide, Jamal said. With protection. Protection. Daniel echoed. Jamal nodded toward the second cruiser. You can't promise the system won't try to swallow this. But I can promise eyes. I can promise time. And I can promise that if someone tries to make him disappear tonight, they'll have to go through me. A gust of wind pushed snow across the driveway. The crowd had grown, guests clustering near the gates. Some whispering. Some openly arguing. A few Lockridge loyalists muttered about decorum and tradition, about how things had gone too far. Others stood quietly, faces pale, watching the illusion crack. The older woman from the crowd stepped forward again, clutching the photograph tighter now. Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. I worked here, she said, loud enough to carry. I worked here when Walter Lockridge was still alive. I saw what he hit. Preston's silhouette shifted. Jamal felt the tension spike. Daniel leaned in, to Mia. We need to get statements. Names. Now. Jamal raised a hand. Careful. Not here. The woman looked at Jamal. I'm ready, she said. I'm tired of being quiet. Jamal nodded. Then we do this right. He turned to Elijah again, lowering his voice. Listen to me. If you speak, speak once. And speak true. Don't exaggerate. Don't perform. Just tell them what happened, and why it matters. Let the rest fall where it falls. Elijah thought of the cookie, the laughter, the cuffs, the cold metal biting into his skin, while cameras watched. He thought of his grandfather's name, spoken out loud by someone who remembered. I didn't do anything wrong, he said. Jamal's mouth curved into something like a smile. Exactly. A sudden buzz cut through the noise. Ivy's phone vibrated hard in her hand. She glanced down, eyes widening. Dad, she said, stepping toward Daniel. Her phone rang again, louder this time. She answered, her voice cautious. Hello? Everyone seemed to lean in without meaning to. Yes, Ivy said. He's here. A pause. Her eyes flicked to Elijah. Yes, she repeated. He's with us. Another pause. Her expression changed. Not fear, not excitement, but the gravity of something irreversible. Okay, she said. I'll tell him. She ended the call, and looked at Elijah, then at Mia, then at Jamal. It's CNN, she said. They want to interview Elijah. Live. Right now. The mansion lights glared behind them. The snow kept falling, and the night, unfinished, waited for Elijah's answer. The sidewalk outside the Lockridge estate was no longer quiet. Spotlights from local news vans cast harsh, unforgiving beams across the snow-dusted ground, illuminating Elijah Simmons like a stage had been built around him. Dozens of reporters stood behind red velvet barriers, hastily installed by the estate staff. But there were no more velvet boundaries that could contain the story. Elijah stood beside his mother, Ivy, Daniel, and Officer Jamal Ricks. The cold air bit at his cheeks, but he didn't flinch. He had refused the offer to go indoors. He wanted to stand where it all happened, where he had been handcuffed, humiliated, dismissed. Now every camera lens in the country was pointed at him. Daniel gently adjusted the small microphone clipped to Elijah's coat. You don't have to be perfect, he whispered. Just be honest. Elijah nodded, his eyes scanning the crowd. There was fear. Yes, but also a quiet force building inside him. A voice that had waited too long to speak. The CNN reporter stepped forward. Her tone was neutral, but her eyes betrayed a curiosity that was almost maternal. Elijah, she said softly. When you're ready. He stepped closer to the mic, swallowing hard. The entire nation leaned in. My name is Elijah Simmons, he began. And I'm 12 years old. My mom cleans offices to take care of us. And tonight we were invited to a Christmas party. His voice didn't shake, but when we got there, people stared. Not because we were loud, or late, or dressed wrong, but because we were black. A rustle moved through the reporters. Someone at the party made fun of me during a game. Then I slipped. They laughed. No one helped me, except Ivy, and that's when she gave me a letter. A letter that said my grandfather, Thomas Simmons, was supposed to have land, but it got taken, lied about, hidden. He pulled the folded paper from his pocket and held it up, trembling slightly. The camera zoomed in. This letter was signed by Walter Lockridge. It proves he knew the land should have gone to my family, that he kept it anyway, that he tried to erase us. Behind the gates, Preston Lockridge stood at a second-floor window. Arms crossed, he watched Elijah with eyes narrowed, like blades. His estate had never felt smaller. Elijah took a breath. Mr. Lockridge told me I didn't belong. He offered me money to stay quiet. And when I said no, they called the police on me and my mom. The crowd gasped.
They put handcuffs on us.
In the snow. On camera. For picking up a cookie and telling the truth. He paused. I'm not here to be a hero. Or a symbol. I'm just tired of people like me being told to stay quiet so other people can stay comfortable. A murmur of support came from the crowd. This wasn't just about a party, Elijah continued. It was about power, history, and lies. My family deserves to be written into the story they tried to delete. A tear slipped from Mia's eye, but she didn't move to wipe it. She let the world see it. Ivy's hand found Elijah's as he stepped back from the mic. The reporter, now visibly moved, thanked him before turning back to the camera to summarize the moment. Behind her, Elijah Speaks exploded across social media. Within minutes, his name trended nationwide. Celebrities tweeted in support. Civil rights groups reached out. Historians began pulling records of the original land deeds tied to Thomas Simmons. The story was no longer Elijah's alone. It had become a cultural reckoning. But behind the scenes, the machinery of wealth didn't pause. Inside the estate, Preston was already in his private office, on his third call in 10 minutes. His lawyer, a shark-like man with a voice that oozed confidence, spoke calmly through the speakerphone. They're gaining traction, Preston said. Faster than I expected. Yes, the lawyer replied. But you have leverage. Public emotion isn't the same as admissible evidence. We start with defamation. Hit the mother. Then the boy's legal guardian. Daniel Morgan. Preston stared out the window, watching the flashing lights below. And the footage? Discredit it, the lawyer said. Say it's been edited. Context stripped. Hire a digital forensics team. Plant doubt. And the kid? Too sympathetic. Don't attack him. Attack the story around him. Preston's jaw tightened. I want a counter-narrative by morning. You'll have one. By the time Elijah returned to the sidewalk with his team, the national broadcast had ended. But the momentum hadn't. People on the street clapped softly as they walked past. Ivy squeezed Elijah's hand again.
You were amazing, she said.
Elijah just looked down. I was scared. You still told the truth, she replied. That's more than most adults can say. Back inside Daniel's SUV, warmth finally returned to Elijah's fingers. Jamal rode with them. Alert, his hand near his holster, not out of fear but readiness. Daniel's phone buzzed. He answered with hesitation. His face changed. What is it? Mia asked. Daniel hung up, his eyes darkening. It's begun, he said. He opened the glove box and removed a slim white envelope. He held it up. A court summons, he said bitterly. Preston is suing us for defamation, theft of private documents, and unlawful dissemination of confidential estate property. Mia blinked. He's suing a child. No, Daniel said. He's suing me for representing the child. Elijah looked up slowly, confused. What does that mean? It means, Daniel said quietly. He's trying to shut us down. Legally, financially, publicly. Ivy's mouth opened, then closed again. She knew what lawsuits like this did to people, especially those without millions in backing. Mia sat back, her voice flat. He's not going to stop. Daniel nodded. No, because now it's not just about land or legacy. It's about revenge. But even as the weight of legal retaliation loomed, Something else took root in Elijah's mind. Not fear but resolve. He's trying to silence us, he said, echoing Jamal's warning. But people are listening now. Right? Daniel looked at him, amazed again at the clarity behind the boy's eyes. Yes, he said. Now they are. As Daniel placed the summons on the dashboard, another alert hit Ivy's phone. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Oh my God, she whispered. The Lockridge Foundation just deleted all their public archives. The courtroom was overflowing, rows packed with journalists, activists, students, law clerks and silent onlookers, who had been following every development since the story first went viral. The air was tense, electric, as if everyone in the room understood they weren't just watching a legal proceeding. They were watching history rumble away. In the front row sat Elijah Simmons, shoulders squared, his feet barely touching the floor. Beside him, Mia wore a modest black blazer, her expression unreadable. Daniel Morgan sat to their right, flanked by Ivy, who clutched her father's legal binder like it was a shield against what they were walking into. Across the aisle, Preston Lockridge arrived with a legal entourage that looked more like a political campaign than a defense team. 5 attorneys in tailored suits, a PR consultant whispering strategy from behind, a bodyguard posing as a personal assistant, and Preston himself stone-faced, unmoved. Dressed in charcoal gray instead of his usual flamboyant red, he was playing the part of the composed philanthropist wrongfully accused. But his eyes kept drifting to Elijah, narrow, cold, calculating. The judge entered. All rose. Judge Dolores Bennett took her seat, her presence more commanding than her voice ever needed to be. She was a black woman in her early 60s, known for giving the shortest lectures and the longest sentences. Her reputation unshakable. She glanced over the courtroom with eyes that missed nothing. This case, she began, has already taken on a life far beyond this courtroom. But it is not social media's job to determine guilt or truth. That is mine. She nodded to the bailiff. Proceed. Preston's lead attorney began with a carefully rehearsed statement, painting Elijah and Mia as misled pawns manipulated by a bitter ex-employee, Mia and a politically motivated attorney, Daniel. He framed the letter as taken out of context and claimed the entire gala incident was orchestrated for viral attention and civil suit leverage. Then it was Daniel's turn. He stood slowly, methodically, and stepped forward without notes. What happened to Thomas Simmons, Daniel said, was not an isolated clerical error. It was part of a systemic erasure. Tonight we will show that the Lockridge Foundation not only denied a rightful land claim, but later used that same man's identity to secure additional holdings, without the family's knowledge or consent. Gasps rippled through the room. Even the court stenographer hesitated for a second before continuing her rhythmic typing. Judge Bennett raised an eyebrow. You're alleging identity misuse by a foundation? We are, Daniel said. And we have the records. He turned to Ivy, who opened a folder and handed Daniel a stack of documents. He laid them on the evidence table. Scanned land registry filings, internal Lockridge memos, and most damning, a document listing Thomas Simmons's name as a co-applicant on a government grant for agricultural development, dated 6 years after his death. Preston's lawyers scrambled, flipping through their own binders with visible tension. Mia squeezed Elijah's hand. The room was still, waiting for the next domino to fall. Daniel continued. We will also present video evidence of threats made against Elijah by Mr. Lockridge, in which he offered monetary compensation in exchange for silence. One of the defense attorneys objected. That video was taken without consent. Judge Bennett held up a hand. This is a one-party consent state. The objection is overruled. Daniel played the clip. The courtroom fell silent as Preston's voice echoed. You don't belong here. Take this. It's more money than your mother makes in 2 years. The jury leaned forward. Several spectators shook their heads. One elderly woman in the gallery whispered, Lord have mercy, under her breath. Then came Officer Jamal Ricks's testimony. He took the stand and swore in, his uniform sharp, his voice steady. I witnessed firsthand the humiliation of Elijah Simmons, he said. I was the one who removed his handcuffs after he was profiled in front of a crowd and news cameras. And I know this family personally. I knew Thomas Simmons. I know what this case is really about. He paused. It's about whether this courtroom has the courage to call theft what it is, even when it wears a tailored suit. Preston stared at the officer with disdain, but said nothing. His lawyers scribbled furiously, preparing their rebuttals. Judge Bennett requested a break. The courtroom erupted into murmurs. Reporters rushed to tweet the developments. Commentators in the hallway scrambled to go live on Instagram and TikTok. Inside, the tension thickened. Then came the twist. Just as Judge Bennett rose from her chair, she paused. Her eyes flicked toward Preston Lockridge. "Mr. Lockridge," she said, her voice sharper now. "A moment, please. In my chambers." The entire courtroom paused, like it had forgotten how to breathe. Preston blinked. "Your Honor?" She didn't repeat herself. The bailiff gestured, and Preston was ushered toward the side door. His attorneys followed, but Judge Bennett held up her hand. "Alone," she said. The side door closed behind them. Inside the chambers, away from the cameras, Judge Bennett sat, hands folded. "Mr. Lockridge," she said, "I'm going to give you a choice." Preston stiffened. "Excuse me? I've seen every tactic your legal team has tried. I've seen the Foundation's scrubbed archives, the PR damage control, the documents that were accidentally deleted. I'm not naive. I have a right to defend myself," Preston said. "You had a right," Judge Bennett replied. "But what you've done is not defense. It's destruction. And if you force me to rule, I will set precedent that will haunt your legacy." Preston's jaw tightened. "What are you suggesting?" "Settle," she said plainly. "Admit the letter's validity. Return the stolen land value. Publicly acknowledge the Simmons family's rightful legacy, or this trial will become a class action avalanche." Preston didn't speak. Judge Bennett stood. "You've ruled long enough from behind glass and gates. This courtroom isn't yours. This legacy isn't yours. And this boy," she paused. "He isn't going to bow." She opened the door. "You have 5 minutes." As Preston stepped back into the courtroom, stone-faced, a new figure entered from the hallway. An elderly man in a wheelchair pushed by a nurse, carrying original signed documents with Thomas Simmons' name, pulled from a private veterans archive no one knew existed. The courtroom was packed tighter than it had been all week. Yet you could have heard a pin drop. Tension radiated from every corner as Judge Dolores Bennett took her seat once more, her black robe seeming heavier today, as if burdened by centuries of silenced truths. She looked directly at Elijah, then at Preston Lockridge. "I have reviewed the testimonies, examined the evidence, and considered the cultural and historical weight of what this courtroom now represents," she said, her voice low but resolute. "The law is not just a tool for the powerful. It is a refuge for the overlooked." The gallery held its breath. "This court finds in favor of Elijah Simmons." A tidal wave of emotion broke loose. Gasps, claps, tears. Elijah's hand flew to his mouth, stunned, as Mia wrapped her arms around him. Daniel stood slowly, blinking back the disbelief. Ivy's eyes filled as she gripped her father's arm, trembling with joy. Preston sat motionless. Judge Bennett continued, her voice cutting through the applause. "The Lockridge Foundation is hereby ordered to pay restitution to the Simmons family, totaling $2.5 million in damages, including interest on land stolen, suppressed documentation, and legal fees incurred. The court also mandates the Lockridge Foundation to issue a formal public acknowledgement of the Simmons family's rightful legacy and update all official historical records, both digital and printed." Preston's lawyers hung their heads. One of them quietly removed his earpiece, already texting a crisis firm. "This judgment," Judge Bennett concluded, "will not undo the past, but it will write the truth into it." And just like that, centuries of silence began to rupture. 3 weeks later, the gymnasium of the Oak Ridge Community Center was transformed. String lights wrapped around basketball hoops. Paper snowflakes dangled from the ceiling. And kids lined up for cocoa in plastic cups that steamed in their mittened hands. Music played softly in the background. No orchestras or jazz quartets. Just warm, familiar carols from a speaker that crackled now and then. Elijah stood at the center of it all. Not in a suit or designer sweater, but in jeans, sneakers, and a red hoodie that read, "Reclaim Joy." He didn't want chandeliers or gingerbread houses molded like castles. He wanted warmth, color, laughter, and a place where no child had to worry about whether they were welcome. Mia organized the food tables, with help from volunteers. Ivy ran a craft station where kids painted their own ornaments. Officer Jamal Ricks handed out donated backpacks filled with school supplies and winter gloves. Even Judge Bennett showed up, exchanging her robe for a cozy green scarf, offering to read Christmas stories aloud in a corner surrounded by beanbags and giggling children. Daniel stood by the punch table, watching Elijah from across the room. The boy was glowing, not from spotlight, but from relief. There was peace in his eyes, hard-earned and unshakable. "Elijah," Mia called softly. "You ready?" He stepped up onto a small stage at the front, just a wooden platform with garland draped across it. A microphone waited, Conversations faded. I want to thank all of you, Elijah began, for showing up not just for me, but for what we're trying to build. He looked out across the room. Black, white, brown, old, young, rich, poor. In this gym, none of it separated them. This party isn't just about Christmas. It's about taking back the space we were never supposed to be in. It's about laughing in places that once humiliated us. It's about remembering people like my grandfather and making sure the next kid doesn't have to fight the same fight. The room applauded, loud and sincere. And if you've ever been told you didn't belong somewhere, he added, remember this night, because we all belong here. Cheers rang out as Elijah stepped down. Daniel clapped slowly, proudly, as Jamal gave a short whistle. Mia wiped her eyes, then turned to the kitchen crew and signaled for the cake to come out. Shaped like an open book, decorated with icing words, "Truth is legacy." Everything felt right. Except for the one chair that sat empty at the back of the room. Ivy noticed it too. She nudged Daniel, nodding toward the far wall. No RSVP from him, she whispered. Didn't expect one, Daniel replied. But I did half wonder if. He trailed off. Outside the community center, across the street, parked in the shadows, was a black SUV with tinted windows. Inside, Preston Lockridge sat in silence. No velvet jacket this time. No ring on his pinky. Just a plain wool coat, the collar turned up, his hands gloved, folded over each other like he was trying not to shake. Next to him in the passenger seat was a woman. Her hair was silver, her face worn but striking. It was the same maid who had stood quietly in the mansion weeks ago, the one who had overheard Mia's call. Now, out of her uniform, her demeanor had changed. She was no longer a shadow. She was a witness. She turned to Preston. You see what you built? She asked. Preston didn't answer. You see what he built? Still nothing. The woman opened her purse and handed him something. An envelope, sealed with wax. The Lockridge crest barely visible. You're going to give this to the board, she said. And then you're going to step down. Preston stared at the envelope. He's 12, he muttered. He's just a boy. The woman's voice sharpened. And that's exactly why he beat you. In the gym, Elijah hugged a young boy who reminded him of himself. Shy, quiet, unsure. He handed the boy a wrapped gift and watched his face light up. Laughter echoed. Snow fell gently outside the windows. The crowd had gathered not for power but for healing. Elijah didn't know he was being watched from across the street. But somehow, he felt it, the weight of a legacy shifting on its hinges. Inside the SUV, Preston leaned forward. They still hate me, he said. The woman didn't blink. They don't care enough to. The driver pulled away slowly. But as the car disappeared into the night, another vehicle parked where it had been. This time, it wasn't tinted. A TV news van. And stepping out was the CNN reporter from the courthouse, holding a new folder, with a story that hadn't yet been told. She looked toward the gym and said to her cameraman, roll tape. We just got access to sealed Lockridge adoption records, and Elijah's name is all over them. The gymnasium at the Oak Ridge Community Center was already echoing with warmth and laughter when the doors opened again. Elijah's Christmas party, reclaimed, had become more than a celebration. It was a testament, a reclamation of every smile taken, every stare endured, every insult that tried to shrink a boy's name into silence. But beneath that joy, another current pulsed, the unresolved legacy of injustice. And for some, it was time to face it one more time. The wheels on the SUV crunched across the parking lot gravel as Preston Lockridge stepped out. He was flanked by his PR representative, a sharp-featured woman with pinned hair and a notebook thick with prepared statements. She'd spent the last 3 weeks polishing apologies, crafting narratives, spinning damage control into shapes that could resemble accountability without admitting true fault. Tonight, Preston was to make a gesture, the kind of statement a wealthy man could offer when his public image was bruised but not yet broken. He stood in the chill night air, shoulders slightly slumped, a wool coat draped over the tailored suit. No velvet jacket tonight, no chandelier glow, only the harsh lights of reporters and a throng of camera lenses pointed directly at him. A simmer of tension spread through the crowd when he walked forward. This event tonight, Preston began. His voice registered through multiple microphones, is heartwarming. And I stand here. He paused, glancing into the gym where colored lights danced over children's faces, where Mia smiled at volunteers, where Ivy guided kids to decorate gingerbread houses like tiny architects, where Officer Jamal laughed at a joke a child told about snowmen misplacing their scarves. Preston's voice faltered, but he pressed on. I stand here because I want to recognize the good that has come from this community. I want to express my deepest apologies for any discomfort or misunderstanding that occurred at my family's Christmas gala. A rustle passed through the crowd. A polite murmur, the kind that precedes applause, or jeers. It was unclear which. Then Elijah stepped forward, not behind a podium, not by someone's urging, just forward confident, calm, taller in spirit than he had ever been in stature. This party isn't about you, Elijah said plainly, locking eyes with Preston through the lenses. This party is about truth. It's about healing. It's about making sure that when someone says you don't belong, other people show up and say yes you do. A moment of silence rippled outward, then cameras flashed. Reporters leaned in. Reporters scribbled. Reporters recorded. Applause bloomed across the room. Not for Preston's apology. Not because it felt sufficient, but for Elijah's courage and clarity. It was a slow clap at first, like tentative recognition, maybe this is real. Then louder still, until every corner of the gym reverberated with a unity that transcended age, color, and class. The crowd wasn't clapping at anything pathetic or performative. They were clapping for something real. A black boy once humiliated, now standing unbowed in dignity that couldn't be bought. Preston stood there, his face tightening with every burst of applause he didn't receive. It wasn't anger exactly. It was shock. A realization that respect couldn't be purchased, scripted, dictated, or spun. It had to be earned, and Elijah had earned it while Preston tried to salvage his image. The reporters pressed their microphones forward now, shouting questions, capturing every inflection of Elijah's voice, his mother's smile, Daniel and Ivy's pride, Officer Jamal's approval. Elijah, one reporter called, what do you want Americans to take from your story? Elijah breathed carefully. He'd thought about this moment, not in fear but in truth. I want them to know that a person's worth doesn't come from wealth, he replied, and it doesn't come from a last name or a party invitation. It comes from standing up when others tell you to sit down. It comes from truth. More applause. Preston looked like a photograph whose exposure had just been doubled. Bright, harsh, revealing every detail he'd worked to keep in shadow. Eventually Preston turned and walked away. Not in defeat exactly, but the way someone walks when their script has been cancelled halfway through the speech. His PR rep tried to catch his eye, whispering fast, sharp directions, but the cameras weren't pointed at them anymore. They were all trained on Elijah. Reporters clustered around him, nodding, guiding questions, pressing for sound bites. Mia stood behind him, not nearly as nervous as she had been weeks ago. She folded her arms across her chest and watched her son shimmer under the media heat, not burning but glowing. Ivy stood beside her, arms crossed proudly, matching Elijah's calm fierceness with a sisterly grin. Officer Jamal watched with sober satisfaction, like a teacher who saw a student finally claim a truth he'd known all along. Daniel stood nearest, fierce yet serene, a lawyer who had watched walls topple because a child refused to be small. One reporter asked, Elijah, what's next for you? He paused, eyes scanning the crowd, scanning the children who looked at him like he was a lighthouse in winter fog. Before he could answer, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He reached inside, pulled it out, glanced down, and froze. The screen glowed with a simple message. Elijah Simmons, invited to speak at the White House. The words blinked like an unexpected sunrise. The reporter beside him leaned in. Is that real? Elijah didn't speak immediately. His eyes lifted from the message, landing on his mother's face, her eyes soft, full of pride and disbelief, and then on Ivy, whose grin faded into seriousness, recognizing this as another turning point. Daniel leaned closer. Is that official? Elijah's fingers trembled slightly, not from fear but from the weight of what it meant. Before he could articulate it, the crowd around him noticed the message and fell into a hush, so complete it echoed. Reporters backed away instinctively, sensing the gravity of the moment. Ivy reached out, her voice low. Are you going? Elijah swallowed. He had already faced down wealth, history, self-doubt, insults, and police profiling. Now, he faced something infinitely larger, a national stage, with the world watching. He looked up, past the crowd, past the cameras, past the glare of television lights, and then he spoke quietly, but unmistakably clear. I'm going, he said. Because truth shouldn't just be spoken here, it should be heard everywhere. The applause rose again, not just of the crowd in the room, but of an audience unseen, scattered across screens and feeds, and hearts still waking up to this story. But just as cameras zoomed in on Elijah, capturing every breath of hope in his eyes, a new alert popped up on his phone. One from an unfamiliar number with a short cryptic message that made his blood run ice cold. You think tonight was the end? They just released the unredacted Lockridge Estate Journal. Elijah's mouth opened. The reporter beside him leaned in, sensing another shock was coming. And then another message arrived, this one without a sender name, only an attachment. Read the first page. Elijah's finger hovered, and the room held its collective breath. When he opened the document, the first line wasn't about land, history, or legacy. It was a private entry from the Lockridge patriarch, dated 1953, confessing a secret that could redefine the entire family story and bind Elijah's fate to theirs forever. No child should have to prove their worth just to be treated with dignity. If this story made you feel something, if it reminded you how deep injustice runs, then don't scroll past. Type yes if you believe in justice. Subscribe if this broke your heart.